Hello dear learners, let's continue the discussion in the module on accountability and control. In the previous session, I was discussing about the importance of control mechanisms to ensure accountability, and we have seen the definition of control as given on the source mentioned on the slide here, that the control includes measure to keep the administration under close watch, and of course to ensure that the representatives of the government and public sector organizations, they make use of their powers in relation to what is prescribed in the laws and regulations. And also another important thing that we have kind of discussed, that because the resources are scarce, they are limited resources, they have to be optimally utilized. There should be judicious use of judicious use of the money so that their resources are not wasted. At the same time, the organizational objectives are achieved. Now, in case of why we are talking about accountability and control mechanisms, and we have seen that what is accountability, in terms of answerability towards the public outside and the other agencies, that what government organizations are doing in terms of their activities. Now, to ensure accountability, control mechanisms are to be put in place, right? So now these control mechanisms are ways to ensure accountability of the government and public sector organization to the outside world, right? Let's look into what kind of control mechanisms are available. I discussed in the previous session there are two broad types of control mechanisms which are available, broadly classified into internal and external controls. So the internal control, if you look at, these are the control mechanisms which actually operate from within the administrative machinery. That's why they are termed as internal controls, because they are exercised or used or make use of in the process within the organization, right? So some of the examples of internal control includes budgetary control, administrative ethics and professional standards, hierarchical control, organizational processes, inquiries and investigations, personal management control, right? Now, the idea here is, what we will do is we will look into each one of these aspects in detail, that how these controls are process wise, how being used in order to exercise control to make sure of the use of authority, right? And of course to ensure accountability. So first among these are the budgetary control. Now, if you look at the budgetary control, as the name indicates, it is to do with more of money and finances, right? So this control is very critical and very important, and it's a very important financial management tool that involves creating and monitoring the budgets. Now, why we need to monitor and create budgets? Because it can ensure the efficient and effective use of resources, that the resources in terms of money that we are using, it is efficiently and effectively used. So if we are ensuring that this is basically meeting the objectives of the organization, whatever we have planned in terms of our objectives, and the budget is being set accordingly, and monitoring is done following some process, so it can ensure that the expenditures that what the organizations are doing in terms of meeting the objectives, they are really well aligned with the goals and the purposes of the organization that they set in the beginning, right? Now, it can serve two different purposes. One is it can also show the direction or guide the actions of the administrator in terms of how much budget is available to meet the demands or taking care of the objectives, and also it provides the framework for decision making to the administrators to how to go forward or move ahead with the other decisions which are related to the use of money and resources in terms of budgetary control, right? So this basically is a mechanism which ensures that how money is to be used properly, and then when it is used in as an internal control process, so this can be also used and showing the the public at large outside, that how accountability is ensured by following the budgetary control processes, right? So these processes when organization make use of, you can always highlight in your discussion in the, when you are reporting it to the outside world, that how these control is ensuring that the money is or the resources are not wasted, there is an efficient use, the effectiveness is being taken care of really well, right? So this particular thing is well justified when the expenditure that the organization is doing is well aligned with the objectives set for by the organization, and also can guide the administrators, right, in terms of decision making, right, framework for a decision making in times to come. Now, how much previously you have spent, how much you can predict in terms of, in terms of trend, how much will be required, and in that case it gives you clear-cut guideline in terms of decision making process also, right? Then comes the second very important control mechanism to ensure accountability is to do with administrative ethics and professional standards. See, this we also have seen in the accountability when we were looking at different ways to look at the accountability, and I talked about the aspect of responsibility, and I said that the representatives of the government and the public organizations, public officials or civil servants, right? So they are to be behave responsibly, in terms of their conduct in their office. It has to be responsible, and of course according to the rules and regulations and whatever the code of conduct of their professional they say, right? Now these standards, what they will do, they are very very vital, the internal controls to ensure how the people in the organizations, people who are representatives of the organization, they should maintain integrity and accountability within an organization, right? So these ethics and the professional standards, what they do is they are very vital, right, to maintain integrity and ensure that the people are responsible enough in terms of their conduct when they are pursuing various activities in their respective functions in the organization, right? Now, what are these standards? What are the ethics and professional standards we are talking about? What they will do? They actually are basically, the guide, right, or a reference point for the people, to see, the behaviors of the public servants. Now, how they should conduct themselves, right? And also, they, kind of give an indication to the people that these people act in accordance to the public interest, right? And they uphold the law, go by what the laws guide them, instruct them, and also promote democratic participation. And in terms of their behavioral conduct, this demonstrate the personal integrity, right? So these guidelines, these standards, administrative ethics and professional standards, they are just some kind of, I will say, the guide to professional behaviors among the public servants, right? So that they behave according to what is required from them in terms of when they are assuming the positions of the public servants, because they are working for the welfare of the community and they should be responsible for this. Let's look into some of the example how this particular internal control is exercised, right? Now, if you look at in India, the profession, the professionals, working in the government organizations, when we talk about the bureaucrats, the civil servants in the public sector, the service sector organizations. So as we talked about that professional standards they have to maintain and act responsibly. So the Prevention of Corruption Act 1988 and of course amended in 2018 serve as one of the primary legal framework for maintaining the administrative ethics and of course professional standards with the public sector organization, right? There are certain kind of references I have mentioned in terms of you can have a look at those references to get more guidelines, details of this thing. Now this particular act, what it does is it addresses the issues related to corrupt practices among public officials, such as if there is a case of bribery, somebody making abusive use of their power, right? So this particular act, they talked about the issues related to the corrupt practices. To do what? To ensure that public servants remain accountable and act in the public interest, right? So there are control mechanisms. So people know that they are being watched, right? Whatever conduct they are following, they have to be abide by the rules and regulation, the professional code of conduct, the standards of ethics and professional standards. So they actually tap on what? To control that they should not indulge into the behaviors which are not in the public interest, because they are to be held accountable, right? Additionally, if you can see that there is also Central Civil Services Conduct Rules, 1964, that also governs the conduct of the government employees. Now, this particular the rules, they outline the expected behaviors from these the public officials to uphold integrity, they being impartial, and of course they being more responsible and transparent in their duties, right? So administrative ethics and professional standards as the internal control mechanisms, they see, first of all, one should also be very much responsible in terms of that they have to conduct according to the professional standards, because they are representing the the higher organizations, government and public sector organizations. So but there are also control mechanism put in place that they do not deviate from that particular aspect, making abusive use of their power, making use of the resources for the personal benefit and all. So those kind of things should not be there. That's why these kind of control are also ensuring accountability for the actions of the public officials, right? So this is about the second aspect of internal control. Then comes the hierarchical control. Now, as the name indicates, hierarchy, it basically means we are talking about the aspect of authority here, right? We are talking about the aspect of authority. Now, what does that mean? It means that this order, hierarchical control order, refers to the structured levels of authority within the organization, right? People working at the different levels. So people working higher in the organization, higher levels, they have exercise, they have power to exercise their authority, right? To give orders, to guidelines, right? To give directions to the people, right? So they also ensures that this, as a control mechanism, ensures that the people in the organizations, they are accountable for their actions, right? Also, this hierarchical control, as I mentioned, put in place, is also to ensure that the overall goals of the organizations, they are understood really well down the hierarchy, and people are following a chain of command, in terms of what is supposed to be done by whom, what are the reporting mechanisms, and the higher officials can always ask for the information from the subordinates in terms of what they are doing in terms of the various activities, right? So this control mechanisms, what it does is it actually help in the efficient implementation of policies and procedures. See, when we talk about hierarchy and we talk about the implementation of the various policies and these things, so it actually help in the implementation of the policies and procedures by monitoring and employees and also influencing employees' behavior through formal mechanisms, through rules and through regulations. So in the system, some things are allowed. What does rule says about it? What are the regulations? So in that case, these hierarchical control, when put in place, they also ensure that the people inside the organization, they are working up to the higher standards of their conduct in terms of responsibility, and of course they are being more transparent in their actions, right, in the activities that they are doing. Then comes the organizational processes in terms of inquiries and investigations. So that's again is the another important control mechanisms that can ensure accountability, right? Now the organizational processes, which I have all just talked about, including inquiries and investigations, are actually designed to ensure compliance with internal policies and external regulations. So if somebody is deviating from these kind of the processes, ultimately the inquiries will be conducted, investigations are being done, and to find out where are the lapses, where were the discrepancies. So when these kind of systems are in place, people know that there is no scope of deviation, and if there is any kind of deviation, these kind of processes will be used, because these processes then help to identify and try to address the discrepancies or any kind of misconduct within the organization. Because you see, we are talking about the internal control. So they try to these processes try to find out through the way of inquiries and investigations that what has happened wrong, what were the deviations in the thing, and of course it's not only identification of the errors or the the discrepancies, it's also to address, right, also the misconduct within the organization. So in that way what happen is regular evaluations and edit, as a part of this mechanism, it will have to continue to maintain the operational integrity of the system, right. So another important internal control mechanisms to ensure accountability of the system, because system as a whole is to be accountable to the larger set of the group, in terms of people outside political authority, interest groups, media, NGOs, and the people in general, right. So these are the processes that can ensure that, how to ensure that compliance is there with the internal policies and of course with the external regulations. I hope this is clear. Then comes the final the internal control in terms of personal management control. Now it is mostly to do with very generic way of doing things. They're saying that when the personal management is to do with more of the people inside the organization. So this focus on the effective management of the human resources to ensure that employees are competent and ethical, right. So whatever day-to-day activities that are being done, in terms of leaders training their followers, what kind of guidance they are receiving in terms of getting coached on the various aspects. So how various aspects of human resource are being taken care of, because you see always there is some kind of mentoring involved. This is the senior people mentoring the junior level people in terms of telling them what is allowed, how they should conduct themselves in case of difficulty, how they should reach out to people for support, especially when your young workforce is entering into the public services, right, the very young generation people entering into the administration. So there are people already with the lot of experience, they can actually coach and mentor these employees in terms of try to train them in terms of if they face these kind of issues or confront these challenges and issues like these problems, so they can always reach out to and take care of the decisions very effectively so that they don't go wrong. So see, the idea here is, of course, we have to ensure that they are competent and ethical enough, but experience also teaches a lot to these people. So mentoring is good, coaching is good, but they also learn through lot of experiences when they are conducting various activities and they are undergoing lot of situations. So they will also learn in the process. But these control mechanisms, when they are put in place, they can ensure that the organizations are accountable, people are accountable, they are responsible for their actions, and as a whole these control mechanisms can also ensure to the outside world that the organizations are doing okay and they are accountable for their actions, right. Now these were internal controls. Now let's look at the the aspect of external control. Now as the text mentioned, I have given the source here. As the text mentioned, the control which operates from outside the administrative machinery are termed as external controls. Now these controls include external control in terms of legislative control, executive control, judicial control and citizens control. So we will look into each one of these in little more detail, but before that, going ahead with this, I am going to talk about very important concept here, that is about doctrine of separation of powers, right. What is this doctrine of separation of powers? First of all, we will look into this. Now doctrine of separation of power is actually a very fundamental principle in India's constitutional framework, right, which means that dividing government responsibilities among the executive, legislative and judiciary branches, right. Now if you go to the the references here, which says that while not explicitly stated in Indian constitution, right, we are talking about the doctrine of separation of power, the Supreme Court of India has declared separation of power as basic to India's constitutional structure, right, though not explicitly stated, but has been declared separation of power as a basic to this thing, right. But why separation of powers? Why we are discussing about this concept of separation of powers? Now the idea here is that any one branch of the government should not get more power over the other, to avoid that concentration of excessive power with one particular branch of the government. To avoid this, we are talking about the concept of separation of power. Now, if you look at the nations across, and if you look at the comparative analysis of separation of power in India, UK and USA constitution by the paper authored by Ghadave in 2024, they say that doctrine of separation of power is a widely accepted principle, but the extent to which is extent of the separation of powers, they vary according to the the national context. Something that works in UK will be different from what works in USA, or something that works in USA could be different from something that works in India. So though it is a widely accepted principle, but the idea here is that the level or the extent to which the separation of power exists there, that also depends upon country to country. That varies from country to country depending upon the constitution and things like that. Okay. Now, when we have a parliamentary form of government, and we are talking about India in this case, it says that strict separation of, see, when we are talking about comparison, we are saying doctrine of separation of powers is widely accepted principle, but the variation in terms of how much separation is there in the powers in the different branches of the government, it vary from nation to nation. So in India, if we talk about, in the form of the parliamentary form of government, it says that strict separation of legislative and executive function not possible. So we will discuss about it, what is the meaning of this, why we are talking about strict separation of this function is not possible. The idea is the Indian constitution, it presents very unique characteristics that tend to see, we will tend to see that there is a lot of overlap in the functions of the three branches of the the government, while following the principle of separation of powers and the principle of checks and balances, right. So this particular character, unique blend when is there, so ultimately it will present a lot of overlap in the different branches of the government. For example, the legislature, the executive and the judiciary as branches, they are free to act within their own spheres, right. But it also requires a system of checks and balances to prevent any branch from overstepping its boundaries and violating the citizens' right, right. If we talk about again excessive concentration of power in one particular domain, right. So we cannot have a situation where one particular wing will getting much more power, overstepping its boundary, and perhaps it can result into violating the rights of the citizens, right. Now, that is why we say that, look at the example of this, the exercise of executive and legislative power, it also is subject to judicial review. I am talking about this thing, right, how these systems of checks and balancing put in place, that executive and legislative powers will be subject to judicial review, and of course there will be some kind of powers will also be exercised on judiciary by executive and legislative, some kind of power by executive on legislative and judiciary, and so on and so forth. So that is what we are going to discuss about after the discussions on this doctrine of separation of powers in that particular context, right. Now, first of all, let us look into the aspect of legislative control. So, talk about four controls, right, external controls, legislative control, executive control, judicial control, and then citizen control, right. First we will talk about the aspects of legislative control in this particular context. So when we say legislative control, so first of all, what is the responsibility of the wing? Legislature, it's laid down the major public policies, or also enacting laws, amendment, and of course repealing. So what happened is, the policies of administration and task of the government, they are also defined by the legislature. So please, we are talking about the things which are under the preview of the legislative wing of the government. First of all, laid down the major public policies, enacting laws, amendments, and repealing. Another is thing that they also policy of administration and task of the government are well defined by the legislature, right. Then legislative laws and policies defining the public organizational structures, mandates to them, and of course their budgets, and of course there is a control over budget and fund allocation, control over budgetary and the fund allocations to the government and the public sector organization. Also, the legislative wing also have a power of scrutiny or investigation into the allocated funds and the activities of the public organization, right? So let's say how the legislative control is exercised by the, what are the means of the legislative control. So also this particular aspect that we are discussing in terms of control, in terms of doctrine of separation of powers and the legislative, executive and judiciary wing, it is more related to the discussion into the public administration. But because we're talking about the aspect of accountability and control, so I thought of including this as a part of public management also, because in the beginning you remember I talked about that when we are building or learning the concepts in the public management, we will rely on the literature from the different areas of research. Public administration was one of them, then another was public policy, and then organizational behavior and general management and so on and so forth. So this part is basically more to do with public administration, but of course is important to be included in discussion here because we're talking about the concept of accountability and control, and that too in government and public sector organizations. So in terms of means of legislative control, these are the different means which are well written in terms of how control is to be used. What are the means? They are president's speech, budget discussion, question hour, non-confidence motion, debate on legislation and so on and so forth, right? Then let's look at how legislative control, what are the checks and balances with legislative control on judiciary and executive. So what legislative control can do for judiciary? There can be impeachment and removal of judges. We are talking about the control of legislative on judiciary, as a wing of branch of the government. Then also it has the power to amend laws declared ultra vires by court. So the judiciary, legislative will have power to do this to control judiciary, right? Then in terms of executive, legislative control, on executive is dissolving the government through non-confidence motion, and also power to assess the executive's work. So the work of the executive can be assessed, assessment can be done. So this is basically about the legislative control of the government, legislative control on the judiciary and the executive, so that the other two wings will not have much more power over the legislative, right? Similarly, if you look at the executive wing, executive control, if you look at executive wing is basically the wing that is responsible for initiating, right? Initiating what? The initiating and originating the public policy making, the role of the head of the executive, right? Initiative and origination of the public policy making. And of course, then when these policy making is done, the implementation of these public policies is the role of the civil servants, or we say public official. So this also have to be implemented, whatever has been is planned. So roles of civil servants become much more important. Now what they do is executive control, in terms of as a branch of the government, they also set the norms and standards, inspection in the operations of the public organizations. So because they have to then deliver in terms of public organizations following public policies and implementations they have to take care of. So there are norms being set for the standards. So there are inspections to be made. That's what inspection in the operation of public organizations. So all these norms are to be set by the executive, comes under the preview of the executive. Now what are the various means of executive control? The means are the processes which are followed to exercise this control, which is ministerial control, administrative control, expenditure and audit control, control through appointment and dismissal, professional ethics and self-regulation, and so on and so forth. Now similarly to this, what we discussed on checks and balances of legislative on executive and judiciary, checks and balances by executive control on judiciary and legislative. Now we talk about judiciary. What kind of control is there by executive? Appointment to the office of Chief Justice and other judges, right? So this is basically we're talking about the control of executive on the judiciary through appointment of office of Chief Justice and the other judges. In terms of legislative, what is the power of executive? powers under delegated legislation, what are the given to them, and also authority to make rules for regulating their respective procedures. See, broad mandates are given, but executive, they have much more in terms of making rules and regulations for the procedures and things like that. So these are the control which are exercised by executive on judiciary and legislative. Now, as you see that judiciary is regarded as the guardian of the constitutional rights, right? So what does this mean? It means that they control the the actions of the administrative actions, and they also protect the citizens in case the administrator or the authority, they encroaches upon their constitutional rights. So in that way, when we say that the the citizens' rights are not violated, some authority is not trying to violate that. So in that case, if that happens, so judiciary have the control on the administrative actions. That's how they're termed as guardians of the constitutional rights, right? They also have the authority of interpretation of the laws and regulations enacted by the public authorities, right? And they have the power of judicial review. What is the meaning of judicial review? Any kind of activities being done by the public organization, government, or the activities of the public officials. So there is a power of judicial review with the judiciary, right? So what happened is this judicial branch, they provide remedies to the affected groups, individuals of the public organization. They also help in the settlements of the dispute between public organizations and the citizens, right? So in that way, they have the power to exercise their control in terms of the judicial review, asking, intervening to take care that the public interests are taken care of well, right? So what are the some of the means of the judicial control? They are judicial intervention, whenever there is the abuse of power by any official, lack of jurisdiction, error law, there could be suits against the government and the public officials. So these are the means of the judicial control. Judiciary can make use of any of these processes to have control on the public organization as well as the government. Now let's look into what are the checks and balances of judicial control on the legislative and the executive branch. So if you look at the judicial control on legislative, it doesn't allow any amendments in the constitution under the basic structure doctrine. So judicial control, judiciary do not allow any amendments in the constitution under basic structure doctrine by the legislative. They cannot do that. So that's the control of judiciary on legislative. Another thing is, what is the judicial control on the executive? It's the judicial review. The judiciary has the power to review the actions of the executive, because to find out whether it violates the the constitutions or not, right? So if that's the case, there are rules, regulation to be followed. They will follow the process to look into the various aspects of the executive. If they actually step on the boundaries, overstepping the boundaries of the others, and then violates the constitution. So these are some of the ways with which judiciary is trying to control the legislative and the executive. Then comes the important aspect of citizens control. So citizens in India, they exercise control over administration through various extra constitutional means, right? Now these methods, in terms of the means, they include pressure from the interest groups, civic engagement platforms. There is a public opinion which collectively enhance the democratic accountability. Now there are a lot of pressures on the government to change their ways in terms of increasing the efficiency, in terms of effectiveness. They have the these people have a lot of power. So this exert pressure on the government, such as these political parties outside. There are professional associations, there are associations of the workers and employees, trade unions, student unions, there is press, and of course mass media. All these the groups, they actually form groups, they actively lobby for their causes, which influence the government to change or come up with the policies and decisions which will favor the society, right? So not exactly related to this thing. I will talk about this My Government platform also, but before that, let's look into how these means of citizens control are exercised. It is through election. People have power to choose their representatives. There is a pressure and interest group. They are part of advisory committee, and of course there is a vigilant public opinion. Public opinion is a separate discussion in this module. I will talk about that in little more detail. Yeah, this was I'm saying that though not related very closely with the control aspect, but initiatives like My Government, the website, it actually facilitates the direct citizen engagement with the government. So what they do is they actually give a lot of feedback on the policies, so that there could be enhancement in the transparency and the accountability mechanism. So control doesn't mean that we need to just force the government to do. So control also means that how to put in put in place the systems which can actually help in the improvement of the overall functioning of the government and the public organization. So that's what is the idea here. So then next is the public opinions. How public opinions towards the government and towards the policies and agencies can actually impact the functioning of the government. We need to look into this. So first of all, if we look at the attitude of the people towards the government. Now, public will have opinion whatever government is doing in terms of their actions, policy making and things. So public opinion, what it will do is it largely influence the public organizations, right? Because why? Because public opinions, they shape the attitudes toward the government policies and agencies, right? So what happened is whenever public have some kind of skepticism, about the inefficiencies by the government and the public organizations or agencies, there is a skepticism in the minds of the people. It always lead to some kind of reforms efforts to tell to the public that organization is careful in terms of overcoming the inefficiencies in the system and try to look into the issues at length, so that public have a very positive perception of this thing, right? But the thing here is the Indian public, like look at the case of the Indian context. For instance, the Indian public's perception of the government inefficiency has led to various administrative reforms, which has aimed at improving transparency and accountability. If you look at the administrative reforms of personal performance management and evaluation system in 2009, the introduction of this has actually aimed to enhance the accountability and performance of the government employees, right? So there were first and second administrative reforms in India, but the introduction of administrative reforms on performance management and evaluation system in 2009 is actually aimed to enhance the accountability and performance of the government employees, right? So I'm talking about when public have some kind of opinion about government, the overall government in general may be negative, may not be very thinking very positive about the government. Vis-a-vis, if we talk about the attitudes of the public towards specific policies or agencies, right? We are saying that maybe people are thinking very negative about the overall government, but they might have some positive about some public policy or some agency. For example, if you look at the role of healthcare professionals, let's say during COVID time. So we'll say that public may be having a very negative reaction to the overall the government, but the role played by healthcare professionals or the non-government organizations, or so people will have a different perception about this. Or let's say the role of army in during the disasters, disaster management and so on and so forth. So for some it will be a different kind of a perception. Now what is the challenge here? Challenge here is the difference of opinion about the government and about some kind of public policy or agency. It is basically challenging for the government to find out what exactly is going in the mind of the the citizens, right? So and also the government then they struggle that what is going on, what it is that citizens really want. So this will lead to lot of reforms by the government to address the structural inefficiencies, and the management of the public organization, right? So this is another important aspect of the public opinion, which is important, in relation to the discussion of management of public and government organizations, right? So with this, we have come to the concluding part of the this particular module, which is people participation and control, right? Of course, an extension from role of civil society, but people participation and control. Let's look at government in democratic politics is based on the doctrine of popular sovereignty, which means that people are supreme and government derives power from the people. So which means that when the people have more power to elect the government and the people are supreme, they must have control of the transferred power to the government, right? So what it requires is, it requires the active participation of people in the administrative process of the public organization. So we will see how participation can take place, people participation can take place, and how it ensures, ensures the control as a mechanism to ensure accountability of government and public sector organization, right? Let's first of all look at the meaning of this, what is being given in the various papers, literature reports. For example, United Nations Research Institute of Social Development defined people's participation as the organized efforts to increase control over the resources and regulative institution in a given situation, social situation, on the part of groups and the movements of those hitherto excluded from such control. Now you see that people participation, see people who are actually ones who have power to elect the government, right, through the voting, the process. So they are to be included in the administrative processes, right? Another way to look at is people's participation can also be seen as the direct involvement of people in the process of administrating development programs meant for bringing about socio-economic changes in the society. So how people are participating in bringing those kind of changes in the society. Also, participation includes the close involvement of people in social, economical, political and cultural processes that affect their lives. See, because all these public policies or the programs or the actions of the government are actually affecting the people's lives. So when it is basically affecting the people's life, all the decisions which are affecting the people's life, so people, they have much more I would say control on the various activities, and they should be involved in the various processes as I have just mentioned here, right? Now, what is the need of participation? Why we are talking about people participating in the control? First is, with this, the people can express interest in the government programs and the policies. People can show that they have interest or maybe action of the any program. Also, letting government know what people think and feel about their actions. It helps to share the feelings of the and the thoughts of the people for the government's action. Now, if you look at traditional decision making, where participation was not a kind of mechanism, so participation in that way can present an alternative way to traditional decision making mechanisms of the government office. So when participation is there, the decision making choices would be better in terms of, because what is going to affect the public if they have their say in that, so policy making and policy design and implementation will be much more effective, right? Also, this participation as a platform, participation as an aspect of control, it is a lot of opportunity for people to contribute constructively to the development of the nation, right? So they can demonstrate that what can they contribute into in terms of the development of the nation. Now, if you look at the modes of the participation, people's participation in the public affairs is mostly informal and indirect through civil society, pressure groups and the non-government organization. Let's look at some of the formal or constitutional methods of participation. There could be participation through electoral system. We have talked about their rights to vote, right? So they basically are making use of their voting right to choose their elected officials, right? For example, the highest official, if you look at in India, is elected by the people through elected representatives, and then this official will then recruit or appoint people in the different the offices. So in that way we can ensure that all public officials, they are elected through the people's participation, but of course though they're through their elected representatives, right? Then they are also involved in various advisory and consultative committees, right? For example, appointment of advisory or consultative committees to ministry or state level bureaucracy, which also define the character of the democracy of the organization. Then these committees can provide valuable insights into policy making or delivering public service delivery procedures, right? Then finally is the Gram Sabha. And the ward committees. Now, establishment of Panchayati Raj institutions for greater public participation at the local level of governance. So there also they will participate in these local bodies. They can always have their say to influence the organizations, and of course put pressure on the government to bring in a lot of changes, right? Now, to conclude this module, we'll say that participation is basically a globally accepted tool to ensure the good governance in public organizations. So all these things, when we are talking about accountability and control mechanism, why we are doing it? We are doing it to ensure that governments and public organizations, they are doing their functions appropriately, and there is a good governance, right? Everything is controlled and leading to a good governance state. In fact, if you look at United Nations, in its 8 principles for good governance also include participation as the key component. Why? Because it is an effective way to hold the government accountable and control its actions, and of course helps to make the organization more efficient, effective and responsible, right? So with this we have talked about a wide variety of the concepts in the accountability and control module. Just to conclude, we have started talking about the importance of accountability. What is the background, why we're talking about the accountability in the case of public sector organizations and the government. We have looked at the different ways to look into accountability, types of accountability mechanisms. We discussed about some of the models and Indian examples of different types of accountability. Then we looked into the different kind of internal and external control mechanisms, role of civil society, public opinion, people participation and control, right? So with this, I am concluding this module. We will continue the discussion on this particular theme with the next module on organizational goals, performance and effectiveness.